Tonight, we have Dr. Abreu with us, who will talk about the impact of family and community support on the well-being of Latinx LGBTQ plus people. A warm welcome. My name is Shiva, and I'm the co-chair of this committee, and I do hope to join with my co-chair, Janan. Right now, the committee members and Mena and Neda are with us. And I would like to say thank you to our donors who made it possible for us to sustain the social justice series. So as you see here, we have people and companies who helped us. At the platinum level, we have comprehensive neuropsychological services, and I'm so proud to say that I'm affiliated with this company. Also, Hartford Healthcare helped us at the platinum level. Thank you so much. At the supporters level and friends level, you see your beautiful names. I also would like to say thank you to the Connecticut Health Foundation for the grant they gave us to improve the infrastructure of our committee. And special thank you to Dr. Ankley, who made it possible for us to have this grant. So right now, Mena is going to launch a poll that there are a few questions, and we appreciate if you would respond. And I'm going to turn it over to Neda to provide you with additional information.
Alrighty, so on behalf of the Planning Committee, we are thrilled that you could join us this evening, and we hope that you continue to attend future speaker sessions. The SJSS is in our second year of programming, and we are committed to combating racism, promoting community healing and social justice, and most importantly, being advocates for change. Tonight is our 8th speaker series this year and another CE event. We are excited about the presentation from Dr. Abreu. As a quick reminder, the CPA SJSS offers free monthly meetings to CPA members, the broader Connecticut community, and to our nationwide supporters. I welcome you to our speaker series this evening, and now I will turn it over to Minna to introduce our speaker.
This time, I'm going to introduce our speaker for the evening. Dr. Roberto Abreu is an assistant professor of counseling psychology and the director of the Collective Healing and Empowering Voices through Research and Engagement Chavere Lab in the Department of Psychology at the University of Florida. He's also an affiliate faculty in the Center for Gender, Sexualities, and Women's Studies Research and the Center for Latin American Studies at UF. Dr. Abreu's research explores ways in which marginalized communities resist systemic oppression and promote collective well-being, with a particular focus on the intersection of Latinx and queer, trans, and gender diverse identities. He served as a member of the APA task force that revised the 2021 APA guidelines for psychological practice with sexual minority persons. I'll turn it over to Dr. Abreu.
If I don't want to listen, just let me know.
What's the topic?
Thank you so much, Dr. Farouk. And let me start sharing my LGBTQ and Latinx community. Can you hear me? Well, again, thank you so much for that wonderful introduction. Every time I hear introductions about me, I feel like I now have to live up to the wonderful introduction. So thank you for that. Again, my name is Roberto. I am at the University of Florida. I use pronouns he, him, and él. I'm excited to be here in community with all of you, practitioners, clinicians, scholars, activists. So thank you for being here this, tonight. So the name of my talk is Impact of Family and Community Support and the Wellbeing of Latinx LGBTQ Folks. This right here, Chévere is the name of my lab. One of the things that I have learned about having a lab is coming up with colors and names is the most, it is the hardest part of running the lab. Where is my, all right, so I think Men already provided wonderful introductions. So I'm going to skip this slide. So today I'll be sharing with you a little bit about the work that I do again at the intersection of Latinx LGBTQ issues in family and community. So I'll start by sharing a little bit about my personal journey. So why do I do this work, right? I'm always interested about ways that people research or work in the areas that they do. So I thought I would share a little bit about that. I'll share a little bit, I'll share about the importance about important Latinx cultural values to consider when working with Latinx LGBTQ folks, people and their families and communities. And specifically, I'll hone in into the importance of feminismo, family, gender norms, respeto, and on the well-being of LGBT Latinx folks and their communities. And I'll provide some broad clinical considerations that of patterns that I have observed, grounded in patterns that I have observed throughout my research in working with LGBT Latinx folks and their families. And also, as I'm going through the presentation, my hope is to leave about 10 minutes at the end for questions. I think that's the part I enjoyed the most, the interactive part. But feel free to put comments or questions in the chat. So why do I do this work? And I also like this opportunity because I love to show pictures of my family, of my kiddo. So what you see in front of you are pictures all the way to the left, top left is me and my son Ezra. The next one is my dad and my son. The one right next to it is my parents and I are on our wedding day. That's my kiddo, and he has pride. He has flags, Mexican and Honduran flags all over his room. That's a picture of him on the bottom. That's actually the one all the way on the bottom to the left. That is the day that we finalized his citizenship papers. The next one is my husband, my kiddo, the three of us, my mom, and him, and then my son, right? And so the reason why I show this picture is because the research that I do, right? Yes, it is research. I do it in this academic context, but it's very personal, right? I identify as a cisgender, gay, queer person, right? Parenting, family is very core, to my identity, right? I grew up in a Latinx household, neighborhood, of Cuban descent. I was born and raised in Cuba, and then when I moved to the United States, to Miami, or northern Cuba, when I was about 12, right? So coming out was it was an experience, right? One of the things that that I didn't have the language to understand at the time was how parents, how my parents, how friends, or how other Latinx, queer, and trans friends of mine were coping, how their parents were reacting to them coming out, or in very different ways, right? And of course, I didn't have the language to understand, but it was always present for me, right? And I had really good experiences with my parents. As you could see in this picture, coming out, my parents were very accepting. We had things to get through, and we still do, right? And so coming from very supportive parents, right? And I attribute a lot of my success, whatever that is, to nowadays, to the way that my parents were able to hold a lot of times to their own, have hard conversation with family members, but the way that they were able to support me, love me, the way they're able to support and love my partner and our son. So it's been a beautiful journey with rocks and things on the way, right? But so a lot of times when I do this work, right, I am reminded of that. Like, I really want to understand how is it that Latinx, queer, and trans folks, right, can thrive within their own communities, right, and not have to step out to get the validation that they need for who they are, for their intersectional beings, as an intersectional being. So yes, so I like to always start with that, how this is personal, like hearing people's stories, right? And the work that I do. Broadly speaking, broadly speaking, my research, as you probably are able to pick up from at this point, I'm really interested in parent and community and child and community members' relationship and family members' relationship, right? I really like to understand not just the LGBT person, but also their parents, their families, and their communities. How are they thinking of supporting their LGBT members, right? What are they experiencing as well, right? So that kind of research has led me to like, two different branches, one of them looking at the experiences of parents of trans children and youth, and I've done some work in that area. And then the other one, as I was sharing, which is what I would hone in on this talk, is the intersection of LGBT and Latinx folks and their families and communities, right? This is some work that I have that I have done. I've done some research to look at how is it that the importance of LGBT specific support, of parent LGBT specific support, and the effects that has on depression. And as you can imagine, or parent support, in a nutshell, is extremely important for the well-being of LGBTQ youth and LGBTQ people overall. Some of the things that I have found in my research is also that often folks of color, right, that LGBT folks of color report more rejection or less acceptance or support from their parents, right? And one of the ways that I look at this is, like, when I see findings like that, it's like, well, what do we do with that, right? What does that mean, right? I think there is some sort of pervasive, sometimes covert narrative that that researchers like to promote. I don't think it's on purpose, that folks of color and families of color and communities of color are more homophobic and more transphobic. I don't think that is the case. I think the thing is that we are not looking at, we don't have good measure, we don't have good, it is the questions that we're asking, right? So I don't think that communities of color are more queerphobic and transphobic. It's just that we are not asking the right question, and these parents and this community are unable to connect as to or understand what this research with largely white parents of LGBT folks is really telling us, right? I've done some studies with the impact of gender affirming all these bands of trans care and the impact of parents and LGBTQ youth themselves, right? But again, today I'll hone in more on the intersection of LGBTQ and Latinx individuals and the role of culture. So one of the things that I was kind of disappointed. I remember being a graduate student trying to figure out the language to talk and put into words that this thing that I was really interested in, like how parents and families and communities interact with their LGBT folks, right? And having an interest in the Latinx community, right? First of all, there was not a lot available, but also there's a lot of negative narratives, like as I was just saying, that really portrays communities of color in a negative light, right? So and a lot of narratives of like STDs and suicidality, and that's important to study, absolutely, but more positive. Okay, I remember asking myself, like, okay, which parent is doing it right? like, where can I find narrative of parents and community members that are actually doing something good, right? And how is it that LGBTQ folks are thriving and doing well within their communities, right? So I try to, even in the work that I do, I try to really provide that nuance and look at the positive narratives, right, of parents and community members of LGBTQ folks. And I think that provides more well-rounded lens, right? And it provides a more holistic narratives. So broadly speaking, what we know about the importance is the broad literature about the importance of family and community members on the well-being of LGBTQ folks. We know that when LGBTQ folks do not feel supported by their families and communities, they report increased substance abuse, increased sexual risky behaviors, increased fear of disclosure, internalized stigma. But when parents and family members are being supported, folks often report high self-esteem, better mental health, general health, and so decreases lethality and all of those pieces, right? And then again, this literature is broadly based on wide specific samples, right? So as I was saying earlier, one of the things that I really like to highlight and look at is like, what is the role? Okay, if Latinx folks are reporting more disparity, right, than their white counterparts, what's happening in the community, right? How are parents in this community conceptualized in being a trans person, a bi person, right? And if we're able to understand what's happening at the cultural level, I think we're able to have a more genuine conversation and intervene in a way that parents and the Latinx parents and community members feel that it's not invasive and that you understand where you're coming from, right? And at the same time, I think as I do this work, as I was saying, it's personal. It allows me to understand a little better, and this is also my hope with my research, that Latinx LGBTQ folks will be able to understand somewhat where their families and parents are coming from. It doesn't excuse rejection or lack of support, but they're able to understand it outside of this wide lens as to why is it that parents and community members are act the way they do, right? So I thought I would highlight some, like, as it is pertinent to the research that I do, some Latinx cultural values that I think are important to understand and that I often come across in my research. What that I should mention is that a lot of my research, it is qualitative. I really enjoy having those conversations with parents and really understanding what they're saying, right? And also with LGBT folks, right? Yes, I do some quant, and my passion and my heart is really at digging deep in having this conversation with, with folks. So gender norms are a big part of Latinx culture, right? So specifically, Mayanismo refers to the role that Latina women have within the culture, right? So that idea, if you kind of break it down, which is very intertwined also with religion, right? So Mayanismo comes from the word Mary, right? It's very intertwined with Catholicism, and Christianity, right? So it's this idea that Latina women should be devoted to her family, just like Mary was, and to their children, and to her children. The woman should be selfless and caring and all those pieces. And I understand that some of those pieces are actually problematic, to have those expectations for women. So machismo and caballerismo kind of refer to the different dimensions of masculinity. So machismo, I feel like folks are often familiar with this word. So machismo refers to is the more traditional and often stigmatizing manner in which Latino men are perceived, such as being aggressive, avoidance of all things feminine, and avoidance of feelings and so forth, right? The need to restrict one's emotions, emphasis on toughness, right? And the fear and hatred of everything that is homosexual or queer, right? And caballerismo provides a more, it's kind of like the opposite dimension of masculinity, right? It's a more positive way of looking at Latino men, or such as, you know, being connected, like being connected to the family, so being socially responsible, being you know, expressing their feelings and emotions, right? So the idea is that I think for a long time, and a lot of people, and a lot of people's perception of Latino men, that in order to hold your ethnic identity, you must espouse this machista beliefs, right? And what we know from research is that actually there are a lot of Latino men who have a strong ethnic identity and do not subscribe to this more negative aspect of seeing Latino men, right? Family and community comes out all the time, right? All the time. The importance of not just the immediate family, and a lot of time community and family are talked like interchangeably, right? And referred to as interchangeably. And religion and spirituality, respeto. So the direct translation will be respect. However, it's more than just like be nice to people, right? There's an emphasis on respect for hierarchical frameworks in the family. So status of parents, elders, like you respect your elders, right? And you know, there's also this emphasis on dignidad, or dignity, or they believe that people deserve to be treated with dignity, right? So that's also another aspect of respeto. And then religion and spirituality, right? As I was saying, even within other Latinx cultural values, such as such as marianismo, right? And family and respeto, there is this intertwine and connectedness to religion and spirituality. And I will put into context, what does this mean for LGBTQ folks and LGBTQ issues, right? So I thought I would show you, I will share with you a little bit about some studies that I have done in this area, and some things that that we have found, right? And then kind of like kind of summarize it for you, right? So this is on top a study that we did. This was actually my dissertation study, 2018, it published in 2020. So I did an expressive writing intervention with Cuban American and Puerto Rican parents of LGBTQ individuals. So I literally asked parents, like, as I was saying earlier, that positive, more holistic narrative of how is it that parents, Latinx parents of LGBTQ folks were thinking about their relationship with their child and their family members. So I literally just asked parents, like, can you write a letter to another parent just like yourself? They didn't send these letters or anything. About your process of coming to accept your child, right? And I got this amazing stories, like long letters, right, about what really facilitated that acceptance process, the different stages of the process that they were in as they conceptualized those stages. Yeah, and then the one on the bottom. So I was like, okay, I need more, right? As I was mentioning earlier, so gender is really important, right? It's a very important cultural aspect. So I did this interviews with fathers, so Latinx fathers of sexual minority folks, right? And my own, and this is my own bias, I was like actually kind of nervous and scared about like what kind of narratives are these fathers going to share, right? And honestly, it's one of the projects I've enjoyed the most, those interviews. I think fathers, again, were really making connections to caballerismo and those more positive aspects that really allow them to connect with their LGBTQ child, reframing some cultural aspects as well about machismo, and really talking about how their child helped them put this different cultural aspect in their LGBTQ child, their different cultural aspect into perspective, right? And then we looked at the influence of parental acceptance and bullying and depression of Latinx gender minority folks. This is more of a quant study. So again, we found the same thing, the similar thing that we have been finding in the literature. Parent support, Latinx parent support, is a huge indicator of well-being, in this case, depression, for LGBTQ Latinx folks. Then I've done some studies specifically with trans Latinx folks. So the first one on top is like resources needs of immigrant Latinx transgender of the Latinx community. Some writing about the importance of resistance and existence for trans Latinx folks. Some research on the experiences of trans Latinx folks in seeking healthcare, in the United States. And you're like, well, what does that have to do with family, right? It doesn't really. One thing that I have observed, right, is that it doesn't matter the question that I'm asking. The research question is if I'm asking about job seeking, right? Folks, there's this constant presence of the importance of family and community, right? So for example, in some of these narratives, folks were talking about like having gender affirming surgery, right? And really receiving help and assistance from folks within their Latinx community, right? Which is the narrative that we often don't hear, right? And how their families were supportive. Again, those narratives that are often absent. Some of the studies that we've done, about looking more closely about what we're talking about, the immigrant Latinx trans people, their community experiences. Again, most studies are looking for how trans Latinx folks are not doing well in their communities, right? Versus what we found is that actually it's a mixed bag, right? And community members and families are actually being supportive and struggling, right, to support their trans members. The other one was specific. I do believe as a counseling psychologist that the person was professional and all these systems are intertwined. So we asked questions about how the trans Latinx folks have been affected by the Trump presidency, right? And yet again, there's narratives about how family and community help them navigate and cope, right? The other one is that you see here is about experiences in trying to find jobs, right? Again, the importance of those connections to family and community were ever present in all of these narratives, right? In the nutshell, right? If I take a step back and I look, okay, well, I strongly believe that culture has a lot to do with the narrative of Latinx LGBTQ folks and their parents and their family members, right? So I have had a chance to kind of step back and look at what that means across the research that I have uncovered, I've done in the last few years, right? What I've come, to kind of tie it to the cultural aspect is that family and community is a big one, right? As I was just saying, that comes out in almost every aspect, right? It doesn't matter what we're asking, right? So participation, particularly participation and welfare of the family unit has helped family members navigate acceptance of sexual and gender diverse people, right? And oftentimes how I've seen this reported and talked about in the research is parents often talk about support. So the importance of receiving support from family members during the process of accepting their child's gender or sexual identity, right? So I remember this mother who said in one of her interviews, she said, I was distraught, I was sad, and then I was talking to my other daughter, and she said, Mommy, just think about it. I think what my sister wants from you is to just simply let her be who she is, right? And how that conversation was critical, right? Something happened within that conversation that was being facilitated by another family member, right? In this case, her other daughter, right? And that help these parents move along, right? And or reframe, have a different lens and a more supporting lens toward the LGBT child, right? Also navigating family dynamics, right? Often the Latinx parents who I talk to, they're really struggling to balance family members' different reactions about LGBTQ people and issues, right? And this often comes out when folks talk about their elders. Again, this whole respect, and we'll talk about that in a minute as well, in a little bit as well. So parents are really struggling to have this conversation. So navigating, respecting folks in the family who are not supportive, right? And then going to folks who are supportive and grappling with that, and then trying to figure it out where does their support and love for their child falls within this larger family context, and navigating those dynamics, right? So those dynamics are really, navigating those dynamics are really important, right? And I think this is really important because a lot of the I think it's very important because a lot of the research with predominantly white parents, right, would categorize a parent who is not completely supportive or completely distances the family as not supportive, right? And I think it's more nuanced for it is more nuanced for Latinx parents and family members, right? So there has to be room for the parent to grow within their own cultural context, right? So maintaining harmony in the family unit was the big one. So motivation to accept your child or family member in order to keep the family harmony, and to set a positive example for other family members. So that often has come out in that. I remember this father who said, I don't know everything that he said to me, and he said something like, at the moment I didn't understand it, and I still didn't understand it, but what I knew is that my role as the head of the family, right, is to set a good example for the family. So if I don't accept my child as gay, then the rest of my family won't. So really taking in their role, right, in the family, in order to maintain that harmony, like the family unit is that important, right? So I'm going to struggle through this, but I do know that I want to keep my family together, right? So maintaining that family harmony. A lot of parents actually talk about immigration and the American dream, right? So motivation to migrate, to come to the United States, because this happened a lot with parents who maybe their child, who they had suspected that their child was queer, trans, right? A lot of time conflating sexual orientation and gender identity. However, nonetheless, perceiving that bringing their child to America will be a safer space. And many of them talked about like, maybe it's not as safe, but that is what I thought or perceived at the time, right? So the other, so gender was a big one, right? So endorsing or rejecting or both cultural beliefs about gender norms in order to accept their child's sexual and or gender identity. So that used to often came out in like coping and reframing machismo. Remember how we talked about machismo as more of that like negative aspect of like what is to be a man, a Latino man, and which is not only at the individual level, but it's a concept that takes place not just at the individual level, but also at the family level and at the community level, right? So it's not just men endorsing this more traditional machista attitudes, right? It's all family members, or many family members, right? So a lot of folks talk about coping with and reframing machismo with their cultural context in order to accept their child or family member's sexual and or gender identity. We'll never forget this quote, right? So I was talking to this father who said, I was really struggling with this and I couldn't accept my child and I didn't understand it. And I was happy. So he said, and one day I realized, we expect Latino men to be tough, right? But if you're so tough, why do you need a woman to do your laundry? And so there's something, so he was able to refrain somehow that his child didn't have to be married or, or have be somebody with his male men identified child with someone of the opposite gender or opposite sex, right? It's like, maybe there's something here that I was taught that maybe I have to rethink here, right? So moments like that often will come up in that reframing of machismo, right? So caballerismo, and emphasis on the fathers, this was mostly fathers who endorses, right? The importance of loyalty, family, and emotional connections as their main motivation for accepting their child's sexual and or gender identity. Then, again, I think that perception of the more tough, aggressive Latino men, right, that people would associate with not being accepting of LGBTQ issues and LGBTQ folks, right? The fathers, there are many fathers who were actually quite accepting and have pretty beautiful narratives about their acceptance process with their child and their family members, right? And then Marianismo, or that, as I was saying earlier, or that role that Latina women have in the culture, right? Often Latina women is seen as the keepers of culture, the person that the person who passes down the cultural values and stories and to their children, right? So emphasis on the mother's role as the keeper of the culture and of unconditional love, right, for their child and family, was a strong motivator for mothers to accept, or folks in the motherly role to accept their child. Again, there's, I want to be cautious here to not indicate that this is how mothers have to be. I think there's some problematic thinking in believing that this is solely the role of the woman, to show unconditional love, right? And to be so supportive and so open and self-sacrificing, right? However, how this came out in the narratives were often like that aspect, that crucial role as the Latina mother was crucial in helping mothers move forward and coming to terms with having a queer or trans child, an LGBTQ child. And then respeto, we've talked about respeto. I know I kind of mentioned it before, right? So there's that hierarchical thinking, deferment to the elders, right? But there's also often how that came out in the research and in my conversations with Latinx parents was about, particular parents often would say things like I'm okay when I love my daughter and I love my child and they can bring their partner home at any time. But if my mom is here, I'm expecting some type of different behavior, right? I don't care if they kiss when they're home, and I don't care if they hold hands, but if my mom is here, and also sometimes so there's that respect, aspect of respect, right? And then again, to kind of as I was saying a little bit earlier, I think for someone outside the culture, somebody will say well, that's not accepting. You don't accept your child, right? If you're putting conditions, right, around how your child needs to behave, and yes, I understand that, right? And that often does not feel good for the LGBTQ person to be given restrictions on how to express who you are around certain family members. However, it helps me contextualize what these parents are experiencing in trying to understand and move forward in accepting their child's sexual or gender identity, right? So yeah. So I'll briefly share with you some clinical implications. And I think these are just clinical in the sense of doing therapy and so forth with parents, but also some things to keep in mind as working with parents and LGBTQ, with Latinx parents and LGBTQ and Latinx LGBTQ folks, right? So family, you probably heard me say family and community like 30,000 times, right? It is that important, right? And group harmony is very important, right? So again, I think group harmony could also be problematic, right? In the sense that, well, if the default is that we all need to do this one thing at the expense of the queer person just because the family says so, right? However, understanding that group dynamic and that group harmony is crucial in intervening and really understanding where parents and family members are coming from, right? As I was mentioned earlier, there's this tendency to believe and think that folks of color and families of color, including Latinx folks, are more queerphobic, transphobic, right? I think it's important to not overly focus on the negative feelings and outcomes, right? I want to be clear that yes, it is important to know how Latinx LGBTQ folks are being harmed within their families and their communities, right? What does that mean, right? And then also recognizing that there are parents who are accepting, that there are family members who are accepting, there are parents who are figuring this out, right? So I think that's a narrative that's important to also bring to the forefront, right? Family and community acceptance and rejection are not dichotomous events, right? So, and I think this is a great takeaway from this presentation is that, because I've said a lot, in their journey to acceptance, right? And I truly mean that it is a journey, right? And if we think from a systems perspective, right? Like, why would we expect parents to get a check mark, and be like, well, you fully accept your child, right? You espouse no heterosexist belief and no, transphobic, cis-sexist belief. Well, that's from a system perspective where parents are navigating the same system of heterosexism and cis-sexism that we all are, right? And for these parents also of xenophobia and racism, right? So rejection and acceptance is not a dichotomy. They're not dichotomous events, and they're not linear either, right? I'll give you an example. I'll use myself as an example of that, right? Again, I have very accepting parents, coming out, and then, but there were things we have to work through, right? Like my mom will be like, I'm going out with friends. She'll be like, protect yourself. I was like, I'm going to have coffee, So maybe some underlying beliefs of like hypersexualization of queer men, right? So we talked about that and we addressed that, right? And then when I went to get married, she's like, well, why do you need to get married, right? She's like, I accept you, I love you, but why do you need to get married? Again, some preconceived notion of like who marriage is for, right? When we wanted to adopt our kids, she's like, well, why do you want kids? So we had to have that conversation again, right? So it wasn't that we had the conversation one time and my mom was good, my dad's good, we don't have to revisit this conversation ever again, right? That's not really what's happening, right? It's not linear, it's more of a roller coaster that is messy, and it could get messy in many ways, right? So I think that's important to also keep in mind. Here to my left, and they're not paying me to say this, I just think it's a phenomenal documentary. It's called El Canto del Colibrí, or the Song of the Hummingbird, right? And it's a documentary with Latino fathers and their kids. And they interview them separately and together, and it's really emotional. You're gonna cry. I think it's awesome that really brings into perspective all of these cultural pieces. So a few other things. I think it's also really important to acknowledge how difficult it must be to reconcile feelings toward one's child, family member, and different cultural messages, right? I mean, these parents are having to unlearn years upon years, of being told who are LGBTQ folks, right? How do they behave? What do they do? What do they don't do, right? So that's a lot. that is a lot. And I think, again, it doesn't excuse and it doesn't justify and it doesn't invalidate how Latinx LGBTQ folks feel, right? But I think it's important, right, to acknowledge that. I have yet to meet with a parent. Again, I think all of the parents we'll meet with are somewhere in that acceptance process, whatever that means for them. But I have yet to meet a parent that even when they said the most maybe horrible thing, a horrible thing they did to their child, it was never because they wanted to harm their child. They thought they were acting in the best interest. They consulted with people in their community, right? And they came to realize it was not the best thing for their child, right? But it was done in a way, so parents are having difficulties and family members navigating these pieces, right? They need help and they need to do better, right? And I think it's also important to acknowledgement, right? As I was saying, I think the other bullet point is specifically to like Marianismo. So the crucial role that women play within the Latinx culture, and I think that could be a beautiful tool to use, right, in helping folks in a motherly role, right, to move forward or to really grapple, right, with accepting their child, right. Latino mothers are really invested in the role as a mother, right, and the role that they hold in the community with in their household, right. So I think questions that get to that importance of mothers, right, of Latina mothers, right, I think can help mothers move forward and actually grapple with some ambivalence that they might have, misunderstanding that they might have, maybe not wanting to explore even a conversation with their child. So I think tapping into this cultural pieces could help move that conversation forward, right? And I think suspending stereotypes of the hyper-masculine Latino male, I think is important, as I was saying, and maybe because of my own bias, but some of the most rewarding conversations I had were with fathers, right? There were fathers who were like, yeah, I go out with my buddies, but they better not ever say anything homophobic. So again, fathers are accepting their kids, Latino fathers are accepting their kids, they're struggling with it, but they want to build this relationship, and I think it's important to also keep in mind. And I think that is the kind of last slide. And my students are very computer savvy and very technology savvy. They're like, Roberto, you need an Instagram and a Twitter and all these things. I was like, okay. So here it is. So here it is. And the last thing, and if you are a voting member of APA, just to kind of put a plug in here, vote for Cynthia de la Fuentes. I think she's fantastic, she's phenomenal. I think she will help APA move forward. And I told her I would do this. And yeah, I think we have a solid 10 minutes for questions. I'm gonna stop sharing my screen.
Thank you so much. That was beautiful. When you were describing, it was as if my clients are in front of my eyes. And specifically with the extended family, that, oh, you're good, you can be you in the house, but what if my cousins come? What if my brother come? What if my mom sees you, oh, she's old? Or what if my cousin sees you, she's too young?
Yes.
Unfortunately. Thank you for mentioning that. And now I see the importance of parents to receive the therapy while they have a LGBTQ plus child. Thank you.
Absolutely.
Any question?
I guess I'll go. As you were talking, there are a lot of parallels that I see in like the community that I grew up in, and I come from like a Middle Eastern background. My parents came here in college and they have a whole cohort of fellow like Iranian American college students they kind of developed a community and a family around. And of course, many of them had children that were in the LGBT plus community. And it's been interesting to kind of see the transition of many of these parents through different stages of their children's coming out, where it was just never talked about, but we all knew. And there have been instances where they basically don't want to admit it or talk to others, but then at the same time, they'll invite their son and their husband to events, but still nobody feels comfortable just openly talking about it. And so I've talked to my mom several times about a lot of these issues, trying to get a sense of like her perspective behind why they don't feel comfortable just saying what it is, and rather saying roommates when we all know they adopted a child together. And so why can't we just say what it is? Or they would get married, but never, we know they're married, but the young ones know because they share, but then the parents never discuss amongst themselves because they'd rather not. And so I was just curious, is there a lot of research, like similar research done? Because I know there's been a lot on just like the LGBT plus experience, but not so much on family of Middle Eastern immigrants within the US. Just curious, because it's not my particular area of expertise.
Yeah, that's a great question, and thank you thank you both for sharing that. And I think you both bring a great point that I think a lot of this underlying concept could totally apply to other communities of color, right? And I think it's important to understand what that means, although there's parallel in that community. I'm saying, I think people listen when you're speaking their language literally, but also, metaphorically, right? Absolutely, yes. I think a lot of this research is, as I was saying, is very wide. So I do not know of anyone who's doing that with Middle Eastern, communities. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. You know what I'm saying? And there's there's not many of us who do this research with from a cultural lens, right? So to answer your question directly, I don't know, and there should be somebody who just does it, right?
Well, I think what you're doing is unique because it's not just a cultural lens, but it's also looking at parental experience and their process of accepting, and also highlighting that they could be struggling, but yet still love their children, which I think, in the westernized culture, it's hard for people to wrap their head around how could a parent say something that may be emotionally hurtful, but at the same time, those same parents may show up and be there for their children. And it's hard for them to see that conflicting kind of ideas, but realizing that they're kind of both in one at the same time. And so I think it's that parental component, or just fathers in general, it's typically the mothers that we focus on when it comes to parental experiences. And so it's just very unique. And that's why I was curious.
Yeah, but and you bring a good point too. Most of this research, even the few research that we have with folks of color, is mostly mothers. We know very little. We know gender dynamics, right? And especially from a systemic perspective, right? Gender roles and all those pieces, right? We know a lot about mothers, but we don't, folks in a motherly role, but we don't know enough about fathers, right? Yeah, and I do love this research, right? And one of the things that I love about it is every time I speak to any parent, I have 30,000 other questions. I have one question answered, and then I have 30,000 other questions, right? One of the things that have become pretty salient to me. So parents haven't necessarily said this, but I can see it in the way they're speaking is, so a lot of white parents will talk about grief, right? Like experiencing grief when a parent, when a child comes out, right? For parents of color, often is, oh my goodness, why would you do this to yourself? You're already a Black man, you're already dark skinned, you're already an immigrant, you already have an accent. Why would you do this to yourself, right? So think about it. If I think about there's a lot of room that needs to happen, I believe, for our parents to grapple with this, right? With this coming out process, right, of their child, right? And the different stages of time, which takes a lot of emotional and cognitive space, right? If you're already dealing with racism, xenophobia, and all those other things, right? It does take away from your ability to be able to focus on your child, right? So that's next on my list of things and projects and things to do, right? Because and I think that's one of the differences, right? It's like these parents are actually dealing with a lot more than just sitting. For other white parents, that might be the very first time that they had contact by proxy with an oppressed identity, right? So yeah, it is a big deal, right? So I don't want to minimize that, right? But there's a process, there's a different process that's happening here for parents and family members of color. So yeah.
I don't know if we have time for one more question. If we do, I was curious of how religion factors in to all of this.
Yes, I think religion is like intertwined with all of it, right? I think, again, kind of like with the machismo aspect, some parents, what I found is like some parents reframe, and a lot of the parents who I've talked to, just to be transparent, are Christian parents, right? And Catholic mostly, you know, but they're able to hone in the positive aspects, like, well, Jesus said that I should love people, right? And that's why I do it, right? So versus the other parents whom I struggle maybe at first on not accepting, I'm more maybe focusing on the sin part of this, and aspect of it. So, but I do think that as parents go on that journey, so to speak, right, they're able to refrain some aspects of their religion and still keep in touch. I have had parents who say like, well, I left that church, I left that church, but I still believe in Jesus, and I still believe in God. It's like, okay, well, that's fine. You were able to tease that apart, right? That maybe your deity that has nothing to do with how the people in your church are behaving, right? So yeah.
Thank you. And thank you so much for presenting tonight. It was a lovely talk. And we thank our audience. Thank you for all of you for joining us tonight. We invite you to complete our post-survey link, which was posted, which was added to the chat. Your responses to our survey will help us in planning future sessions. We are excited to say that the first in-person CPA social justice event will be on October 17th at 5 p.m. at Albertus Magnus. It's a college, it's a justice panel, and Dr. Michelle Silva will present with 3 other presenters on justice and immigration. And I would like to end by mentioning that our ability to maintain the social justice speaker series is through fundraising, and we greatly appreciate all donations moving forward. And we put a link in the chat as well. Thank you for coming tonight and joining us this evening, and we look forward to seeing you next month or in November. Thank you all, and thank you so much, Dr. Abreu. It's been a pleasure to listen to you.
My pleasure. Great to be in community with you. Have a great night. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you so much.